Welcome back to another edition of the PFF podcast. We're going to get into some draft talk here, previewing the upcoming college football season, the players, teams to watch, what to look for basically. But first, let me talk to you guys about these new best ball leagues on Steve and I's new favorite app called Draft. Go to playdraft.com. The best ball leagues are you draft once. They have slow drafts or fast drafts where you draft once on the app, you pick, your whole roster, 18 players, QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, that whole thing. Same roster as always, but there's no trades, there's no waiver wire, there's no setting a roster. You just get the best player at every position every week. And so you set it, forget it, end of the year, whoever had the best team, whoever had the best draft, they win the money. Don't have to worry about injuries, don't have to worry about, that waiver wire, don't have to worry about setting a lineup on Sunday before the game. No worries. End of the year, you find out if you won or not. It's fun. You get to go as many leagues as you want, and the drafts start every couple minutes. And the best part is you can win cold hard cash. There are $3 leagues. There are $100 leagues. You can win $1,000 in one setting. So no salary caps, real live snake draft against other people, friends, family, whoever you want, complete strangers. For a limited time only, all new players will get free entry into a $3 best ball draft if you use our promo code PFF. That's right. Get the app, use the promo code PFF, and you guys get a free entry into a $3 best ball league. Just go to your favorite app store, search draft. That is playdraft.com. We think you guys will enjoy it. I know I've had fun drafting already. All right, let's get into some actual draft talk about some actual prospects here, and to join us to talk about them, we have a special guest, Josh Liskowitz of the new PFF Drafts podcast, the podcast that talks NFL draft all year long. He co-hosts it with one of our other analysts at PFF, Jordan Plocker. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
we're going to have some fun.
Excited to have you here, and we're going to kick it off by just saying who is the number one prospect to watch in this upcoming draft, Josh?
Well, I think you always have to start at quarterback, and this position might fluctuate, so this pick might fluctuate, but I think at this point, Sam Darnold is the standard to which the other prospects are trying to live up to, and obviously he had a shortened year, didn't play the first 3 games of last year, and then really completely turned around USC's season last year. I know when we were sitting around at the draft, talking to an insider at USC, he said, yeah, Darnold saved jobs with his performance, which is really quite remarkable that he was able to do and accomplish everything he did in such a short time span in his first year as a starter. But in terms of what you see with him on the field, he has a decent arm. I don't know that it's huge. I don't know that that's necessary either, and that's something Steve could talk a little bit about. But you see him just make every single throw on every platform with incredible accuracy. He really does an excellent job of manipulating safeties and linebackers and coverage and corners. Understands his offense very well, which was kind of one of the shocking things about him and his play. Again, being such a new starter. And some of the throws he made, just the incredible accuracy he showed. You can't watch that and not help but get excited. There are some issues with this game, in particular his mechanics. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of, but there's a lot to like about his game, and at this point I have to say he's probably the top guy.
Yeah, the thing about Darnold, and you mentioned, he saved jobs, and Mike, you graded that first game, right? USC against Alabama. How bad and just outcoached and outmanned and out-game plans did they look? I mean, they were so bad. False starts left and right, didn't know snap counts. So those first 3 games at USC were bad. And then he takes over week 4 against Utah, and just the entire team looked different, and they went on that stretch and end up in the Rose Bowl. So, there's a lot to like about Darnold on the field. I think the thing that stands out most to me is that feel and anticipation that he has. And you have to remember, he was a redshirt freshman last year. You don't see redshirt freshmen come in and have that type of feel that he had. Great throwing through zones and leading players to open spots and zones. Outstanding throwing to the middle of the field. He had the number 2 grade at the intermediate level, number 3 grade throwing in the middle of the field in all of 2016 in the entire nation. Adjusted completion percentage against pressure was second. Against the blitz, it was first. So up and down the line, there's a lot to like about Darnold, both, from a numbers standpoint and just from a, watching him and evaluating him standpoint. There is a lot to like. I'm with Josh as far as the arm strength goes. A lot of times with draft prospects, if the first thing you talk about is a guy's arm strength, sometimes that's not always a good thing. And there are some prospects we'll talk about later where that's the first thing we talk about. This guy's a big arm, but Darnold's kind of the opposite. He does these NFL type things, the anticipation, the middle of the field, throwing through zones, pocket movement, all these things, NFL type things. Then you have to look at his arm and say, okay, it's not the greatest, but I think because he throws with such great anticipation, he kind of gets away. He can get away with it. He can work with it. Reminded me a little bit of Phillip Rivers watching him play, and not just because he does have an unorthodox motion, but his feel for the game and that the ability to make some of the throws that he makes reminded me a little of Phillip Rivers. As far as the throwing motion goes, yes, it's long. I do think it's quick enough. I don't think it's one of those, like when you're watching Blake Bortles, you're like, man, that is a long, deliberate throwing motion. I think with Darnold, I think it works well enough for him. It's not ideal, but it works for him. My bigger concern is the deep ball. I mean, when you compare his accuracy at the short and intermediate level compared to his deep numbers, it is like night and day. Really struggled, graded at 46th out of 116 qualifiers on 20-plus yard throws. And then when you get to 30-plus yards, he was 49th. And that might actually be generous. He had a pretty poor deep ball, underthrew quite a bit. And that's the big thing for him to improve. But as far as I think the quote-unquote unteachable type stuff, the feel for the game, middle of the field, the anticipation, he does it extremely well.
I definitely think the deep ball stuff can be adjusted. That was certainly the case with Andrew Luck coming out. I remember going into his last season at Stanford, that was really one of the biggest knocks on him was his inconsistency of his deep ball. But there's a big difference between those two in that capacity, and that's Andrew Luck's overhead throwing motion. I think that really lends itself well to being able to figure out the deep ball because it's really just about changing the release point and getting the proper loft on it. And when Darnold is starting his throws from the hip, as he usually does, I think that makes it a little bit tougher to make that throw. So we'll see if he makes an adjustment on that. And if at some point at the college level, certainly at the NFL level, it's a concern if defenses are able to make adjustments and play off of that loopy motion. Certainly defensive linemen are going to be looking at it, trying to cause fumbles, trying to jar the ball loose when he's pulling his arm back so far. And defensive backs, they can have an opportunity to get another little half-second jump on the ball if he's taking a little bit longer. I know Stevie said his release is actually a little bit quicker, and I tend to agree with that. But that can end up being played off of as well on the back end. So it's one of those things we'll have to see how it develops. Maybe it doesn't this year. Maybe it'll be next year if he decides to stay, or if he goes pro, they'll try and work on him there. But my guess is the NFL is going to try and work on that regardless of the production he puts up this year.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And then, the one other thing you have to mention with Darnold, I know we always talk about the it factor and how maybe we shouldn't talk about it factor or we can't quantify it, but it's kind of a thing. And it goes back to, when he took the team over, it looked completely different, not just because he was playing well, but the team just looked completely different. And then there's that element of you're in the Rose Bowl, you're in a shootout, and, USC's down with under 2 minutes to go, and Sam Darnold's about to drive them down the field. And I think you just have that feeling he's going to get it done. He's going to get the job done. And then he makes this incredible throw, middle of the field, in between three defenders, perfect timing, perfect accuracy, and there's no surprise there. So that ability to be cool under pressure, to make plays down the stretch, I feel like Darnold has that ability as well. And, when you see that early on for a guy, again, I think that does bode well. So, again, a lot to like about Darnold, certainly some concerns, but, that's why we're here to, still has another year or perhaps two before he goes into the NFL.
So if we were doing this podcast a year ago today, I think we would have been probably would have been talking about Deshaun Watson in a similar light, saying, he's the number one overall guy heading into the season. But then when it's all said and done, Deshaun Watson didn't even end up in the top 10 of the draft. Could we see a fall like that from Grace, from Darnold? Or even if he has this season like Jameis Winston did before he came out, is he still going to be the top guy just because of the tools he possesses?
I think it's entirely possible that could happen. And so much of that has to do with the depth of this class. We'll get into it later, but there's 5, 6, 7 guys that could be first rounders. So when that happens, really, it's some of it's flavor of the week. It just depends on who's picking up high and what they like. And, we can't make definitive judgments at this point. We can just really say what they are. They have a full year to prove themselves, and we'll see where that goes.
I think it's closer to a Winston situation, though, because if you look at when you line up the guys' positives, when you looked at Jameis in 2013 when he was outstanding, you watched him and you said, okay, pocket presence and poise and all these NFL type things, those traits will stay consistent. Darnold's a lot closer to that than I think Watson was, where with Watson you said, okay, he can make all the throws, but pocket presence isn't great. Maybe he's not great at going through progressions. And I went into last season saying, yeah, I think he should be the number one overall pick, but I need to see improvement in these areas. And I thought he actually took a step back. Watson did take a step back last year in areas that he shouldn't have. So I think it's closer to a Winston situation, but I could also see, to Josh's point about the throwing motion, I mean, it's, these guys get picked apart left and right. So I could see Darnold also getting picked apart as well.
Like I said, I expect the NFL, regardless of its true functionality, to try and pick that apart. Whether it's, probably not going to see him in all-star games. Obviously, if he comes out this year, we won't. But that tends to be when the seniors go, you'll start to see that a little bit. But I got to imagine whatever team drafts him, that's one of the first things they're going to do is see, let's see if we can fix his throwing motion up a little bit, because regardless of whether it really is an issue on the field, I think the NFL is going to view it as one, and that could affect his draft stock.
Yep.
All right, so Sam Darnold's the prospect to watch here. Who is your second favorite prospect to watch, Steve?
I think we're going to fight over this one, but not that we disagree, but just who wants to talk about him first. Derwin James, the safety out of Florida State. I really wanted to talk about him first. Probably the most fun player to watch in the entire draft. He's a guy just from a size and speed standpoint, really stands out. Stepped in as a true freshman in 2015, and he was the top graded safety in the entire nation as a true freshman. And, Florida State does everything with him. You'll see him on one snap, you'll see him play free safety, you'll see him play in the box, and then you'll see him line up and rush the passer. And I'm not talking about a blitz. I'm talking about he is an edge rusher. He is a stand-up edge rusher playing essentially a stand-up defensive end role. And he held his own and actually did really well against opposing tackles as a pure edge rusher. So I don't know how much of that he'll necessarily be doing at the next level, but just that ability to affect the game in all phases as a coverage defender, man coverage, zone coverage, as a run stopper, and getting after the quarterback. Derwin could do it all. Only played 100 snaps last year due to injury, so can't wait to watch him. And, I think he's a top 5 versatile defensive type of player.
Yeah, obviously he needs to get back to form coming off that injury, and sometimes that takes a year to do. So we'll see where he is in that regard this fall. Obviously starting out right away with a massive game against Alabama. I'm excited to see that one, and he's certainly one of the reasons for that. But the thing that stuck out to me is just trying to keep in context that he was a true freshman and just looking like he did, physically, athletically. I mean, this isn't – we aren't talking about Bowling Green here. Sorry, Bowling Green fans. But this is Florida State. They had a top 5 pick in that secondary with him, and he just looked – I hate to use the cliche, but he was a man amongst boys, both physically in the way he just looked on the hoof, and his athleticism, and just in every little facet of his game, his physicality, his speed, his agility. He just looked like he was already an NFL player, and he was just a true freshman. So it was really phenomenal to watch him on film. And, I hope he's back to where he was, because he's a lot of fun to watch.
That really was the biggest thing that jumped out to me from the limited time I've seen him is just that, he's on a field where pretty much everyone's an elite athlete if you're playing that high level of college football, but he was on another level himself. He was moving at a different speed. He was playing with a different physicality. And, who knows what position that he's going to be best at in the NFL, but like you said, he looked like he could do anything. He could be a full-time edge rusher and get the job done if he wanted to.
And Josh, one of my favorite things that you and Jordan are doing on the Drafts podcast is going back through the 2017 draft and listening to all of the press conferences from teams and kind of dissecting what went into their picks. And the common theme, because I've been listening to every episode, the common theme seems to be versatility on defense, right? It's all about guys that can cover tight ends or cover in the slot, play linebacker, play safety. The Arizona Cardinals, a great example where they have guys like Tyrann Mathieu, but they draft Budda Baker, draft Hassan Reddick, who are basically just hybrid everything. They can rush the passer, they can play linebacker. They're all over the field. Derwin is that perfect prototype. He's not. I think he still has room to improve, maybe as a zone defender and as a man coverage defender, which is scary because he could still, the fact that he could still get better. But he's that prototype of defensive chess piece that the NFL is looking for, a guy that's going to combat all of the different ways that offenses are moving people around, tight ends, slot receivers, running backs. Derwin James is that perfect chess piece for the defense.
Well, and ultimately, it's a built-in insurance policy for the team as well. Let's say he doesn't perform well on the back end as a deep safety in coverage. You have his ability as a pass rusher, his ability against the run. Obviously, he's got size that we just talked about, an incredible size for his position for a freshman. Maybe you bulk him up, and maybe he's a Deion Buchanan type in the box. Maybe he's a true linebacker at the next level. The way it's becoming such an athletic position, being asked to do so many different things. So it's one of those things where I think it gives teams a little bit of sense of security that, hey, this guy's not going to bust because there's so many different things he can do. He's going to do at least one of them at a very, very high level.
That's it. Derwin James, yeah, I'm on board with him wherever you want to draft him. I think I'd be happy to have him on my team in the NFL. Those are the top two. Who else are we looking at to, round out the top? What's your third guy on your board that you'd be watching, Steve?
Well, let's go to Connor Williams, the tackle from Texas. He's a guy that stepped right in as a true freshman and performed well. And it's one of those things where if our data goes back to 2014, and if you look at the number of true freshman offensive linemen who have stepped in and had success, graded well, performed well in the run game, in pass protection, there's only a handful. And Connor Williams is one of those guys. Then as a true sophomore last year, takes his game to a whole new level. He's a top 3 type of tackle in the entire country. I think he's outstanding as a run blocker. He can beat people up at the line of scrimmage. He is so smooth getting to the second level, and when he gets there, he just destroys linebackers. So there's just so much to like about his game. And smooth pass protector, only gave up 4 pressures last year. The thing to watch, I think, with him, this will be his third system in 3 years. So last year was a little bit more of a lineman-friendly system, and it'll be fun to watch him adjust to his third system in 3 years and see if he can maintain that production. But man, he has it all. I think he's certainly a top 5 or top 10 type of tackle.
And honestly, I bet the NFL absolutely loves the fact that he's on his third different system this year, just because it's a way for them to really evaluate all parts of his game. So you've seen what he's done the past 2 years. Now he's got to maybe do a little bit different role this year. You get a full picture of what he is. And to me, I'm in full agreement with you. I think he's a complete package. There's not a thing that I don't think he can do in terms of being a tackle and performing at the next level, certainly as a pass blocker, but as a run blocker as well. I love his physicality and toughness and his athleticism into the second level. When I watch him on film, the overriding feeling for me in terms of his draft stock is the only way he's not a top 5 pick is if all those quarterbacks get lumped in there and every team in the top 5 needs a quarterback. Because ultimately, that blindside protector, that's still a highly coveted position, so he's going to be up there, and he's clearly going to be the top guy there. It's just a matter of which one needs a tackle, doesn't need a quarterback. Well, that's a good point, too.
There's no such thing as the blind side, gentlemen. It's all about where the read's going for the quarterback. But you still need good tackles. Connor Williams
Yes.
I do say it does concern me a little bit, that offense he was in last year. Obviously, he's getting a chance to prove himself again this year, but that offense was just incredibly simplistic in terms of the blocks he's asked to make. A lot of full slides from the offensive line, a lot of play action passes, a lot of just down blocks, crushing a guy that not really can do anything about it. So that's a little concerning, but yeah, the tools are all there to where if he can put it together again this year, I would be comfortable taking him in the top 5 from what I've seen. So those are our top 3. We have a safety, a tackle, a QB. Steve, who's next up on your list?
I'm going to lump the 2 running backs together, and it's Penn State's Saquon Barkley and LSU's Darius Geis. I think both of these guys, there'll be a healthy debate on both of these guys as to which might be the better running back heading into the draft, but we talked about Connor Williams stepping in as a true freshman and performing. Saquon Barkley stepped in as a true freshman 2 years ago and led the nation in our elusive rating stat, which essentially measures missed tackles, yards after contact, both in the run game and in the pass game. So have to love what Barkley can do. He's a big play threat, and so is Geis. So you've got 2 guys that are that you could trust in the passing game, that can be 3-down running backs who could create big plays, make people miss. When you look at Geis, he stepped in last year. He was good in 2015, but last year he got a chance once Leonard Fournette got hurt, and he outperformed Leonard Fournette, who went 4th overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. 7.6 yards per carry, and 60% of his yards came on 15-plus yard runs. So we're talking about an explosive big play threat in Geis. So both of these guys, I think you talk about positional value and where do running backs slot in. Well, if they're big play home run threats and they can affect the passing game, I think you could start talking about them in that first round range. And both of these guys are special players.
Yeah, I'll start with Barkley, guys. First off, area that he does need to improve in is pass protection. That wasn't something that he really excelled at last year, and he's going to need to fix a little bit. But then again, because of his abilities as a receiver, I don't know that the NFL is truly that worried about it at that point. There's some technique issues he needs to clean up, but he brings so much else to the table, even on 3rd down as a receiver, that I don't think that's going to hurt his draft stock at all. But he's unique to me because he just has defenses on edge every single time he carries the ball. And I can't tell you, watching him a couple of weeks ago, how many times I saw defenders just vacate their gap assignments because they're trying to anticipate his cutback, his elusiveness. All of that was just terrifying defenses. You could see it really affected how defenders played. And so it's rare that you see a back like that just able to completely dictate a defense. Now, I will point out a couple of things with him that I want to see not necessarily fixed, and certainly at the college level, because of the nature of them, we're probably not going to see change, but something that he needs to be cognizant of as he moves on to the NFL, presumably next year. Of course, college has those wide hashes, and that's something I think he really takes advantage of. He likes to bounce the ball outside. He does that quite a bit. Can he bounce it back inside? Can he stay within the context of the offense? Yes, he has the patience and vision to do so as well. But he knows that at this level, he has the speed and explosiveness to consistently hit that edge, especially when he has more room. So he takes that quite a bit, when oftentimes he should probably be holding his line. So that's something to watch for this year to see if that adjusts at all. And obviously that's something to watch as he transitions into being a pro.
I'm on board with you, Josh, there. That is very concerning, those vision things, because when you get to the NFL, that freestyling, it just doesn't work. The majority of backs that come into the NFL freestyling that much just get torn to bits because you can't bounce out. The defensive ends are almost as fast as you in the NFL. Linebackers and safeties are as fast or faster. So that is worrisome to me. The only back I can think of that freestyles as much and gets away with it in the league is LaShawn McCoy. So you got to be a freak. But the thing is, Barkley kind of is a freak. You know, he has those freakish qualities, so maybe he could be the exception. I am a little worried, though, if I'm taking him top 5, that he's, doing it that often as he does.
Yeah, no draft eligible running back changed the initial point of attack as often as Barkley, and fifth highest percentage of his carries for 0 or negative yards. Those absolutely concerning stats, things you want to just see a little bit more consistency from. And you compare that to a guy like Nick Chubb, who we have ranked lower from Georgia. Chubb's not as dynamic as Barkley, though he could get back to a better spot coming off of injury. But Chubb's a guy who just kind of gets that 4, gets that 5 when it's there, takes what's given. So stylistically, you just have to know what you're getting too. If you're going to have a guy that might have some negative plays, I'm not saying he's Barry Sanders, but that was always the thing about Barry Sanders. There might be some negative plays, but there'll be those explosive plays as well, and that's just something to keep an eye on with Barkley.
Yeah, and on to Darius Geis a little bit. Some of my thoughts on him. The SEC always seems to have backs that have some size, that have that explosiveness through the line of scrimmage, to where once they get into the second level, they're just so hard to bring down because they're physical and they have that speed. And Geis is certainly that guy, and we talked about his elusiveness, and some of that is power, some of that is his foot quickness as well. So that's certainly a positive for him. One thing that is a little bit concerning with him, I want to see, especially this year, now that Ethan Posich is in the NFL with Seattle. That was his center last year. I want to see how he does, assuming that his offensive line may not be as structured and as consistent as they were last year. LSU was PFF's top offensive line in the country last year. He had 59.9% of his yards came on 15-plus yard runs. So that home run hitting ability is awesome, but I want to see, can he consistently get the job done if
so there's the top
everything's
5.
not laid out
what
before
other
him as it often
players,
was last year.
Positions we really haven't talked about many along the defensive line yet. Who there do you see sneaking into the top 10 of next year's draft?
Few edge rushers, or 2 edge rushers to take a look at. Josh, I know you're pretty high on Harold Landry from Boston College. He's really had a couple extremely productive seasons, both as a run defender and rushing the passer. And then Arden Key from LSU, a guy who off the field, he's been away from the LSU program. By all accounts, he should be back for the season. But as far as pure edge rushing ability, he has to be in the conversation. Josh, are you like Landry a little bit better? Is that right?
That is correct. And mostly it's because I value the production on the field above the talent. And I think the talent's there for Harold Landry too. It's tough because so much of his pressures, it looks like when you first watch him on film, are because of his just pure edge speed. But I think as the year progressed, and I graded the bowl game against Maryland, it was very evident there that he started to kind of get the full repertoire of moves, which he should be able to have just because he has that ability to bend and dip and that speed. So it's just a matter of him kind of incorporating all of it, maybe improving his run defense even a little bit more than what he has. He tends to get caught up too far upfield at times. That was some of his issue. And we also pointed out in the draft guide that he did a lot of his damage against right tackles, and his pass rush productivity was significantly better against right tackles, which really in any conference, but certainly in his conference in the ACC, you're not going to find a ton of NFL caliber players at that position. So that's something else to watch for going forward. But I think he has all the tools to be a standout edge rusher and high pick in this draft.
Yeah, I agree on Landry. It's not that you dock him for being productive, but you just have to, the caveats there that, he kind of dominated some right tackles. As far as Arden Key, again, you see that burst. You see the productivity as well. Number 4 pass rush productivity in the entire draft class off the edge. But against the run, it reminds me a little bit of a lesser Myles Garrett, where we kept saying to Garrett, we want to see him get better and better and better against the run, and he did it. To take a much bigger step forward against the run because it just hasn't been his game to this point.
Does size worry you about either of those guys? The run defense, I could really not care. Like, that doesn't bother me one bit. But the fact that they both, when I put on the tape, they both look fairly slight as far as NFL standards. I know they'll grow a little bit as they get older, but you still have to have some juice behind you to worry NFL tackles about the bull rush. So does that worry you at all?
Yeah,
with Landry, not quite as much as Key. I mean, Key, we have him listed as 6'6", 238. So he's got the super long arms. He's got the height, but that's just simply too light to be on the edge on a consistent basis in the NFL. And I think it showed up at times, certainly in his run game. He wasn't very physical at the point of attack. Steve, you made the comparison with maybe a lesser Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett was a guy that some NFL teams worried about his toughness. And Key, I think, has shown much less of it at the college level so far. So he needs to bulk up. He needs to be stronger. He needs to be tougher at the point of attack. Those are all things we need to see him improve upon this year.
Yeah, agree on Key. And with Garrett, he was a guy who was slender coming in, but by the combine, what was he, 270, 275?
Yeah,
just crazy power. But you actually saw that in his junior tape, where as a sophomore, when he was trying to take on pulls and he was trying to play with power in the run game, you just didn't see it. By Garrett's junior year, you could see it. He was popping guys on the pull and taking out guards and actually playing with power. You want to see that from Key, and I don't know, he would have to take a big step forward because it is a big, long, lanky frame, and you do want to see that in the run game. And as a pass rusher, from a bull rush standpoint, he was 58th in the draft class, one bull rush pressure every 140 rushes. So still a lot of room to improve in that area as well.
So there you have it for the guys on the edge, Arden Key, Harold Landry. Any more defensive linemen we should be looking for, maybe interior guys?
Yeah, these are two of my favorite guys in the entire draft, and not just because one of them happens to go to my alma mater. But first off, let's start with Vita Vea from Washington. Huge guy. What do we have him listed at, guys? 6'6", 3, well over probably 320, 330.
450.
450 pounds, and he runs 4.5 in the 40 as well. So
344.
There you go. Yeah,
page 113 in your draft guide, Vita Vea and Maurice Hurst, your two guys that you want to compare. Carry on, Josh.
Yeah, and when you see a guy that's a defensive tackle that is that big, you think, okay, he's the run plugger, he's going to eat up blocks. They can do everything. He's excellent pass rusher. He actually ranks 6th in the class in pass rush productivity. He has some moves. He has really quick feet for being such a huge man. And yes, he can dominate and just absolutely toss blockers aside in the hole. And certainly that's what he's going to be known for. But I think he's a complete player. Certainly you want him as your one, but I think he's so much more than that because of his phenomenal athleticism for his size. And Maurice Hurst is kind of the opposite in terms of size. He is listed at 6'2", 282 is what we have him at. And that's pretty much what everyone has him listed at, height, weight. But when I watch him on film, I don't get that size at all. He just looks and plays so much bigger than that, like he's a 300-pounder. And honestly, he reminds me a bit of Gerald McCoy when he came out of Oklahoma in terms of just that raw explosion off the snap, being able to translate that to power as well. Needs to work on finishing a little bit more maybe, and certainly it'll be interesting to watch him this year if he has a lot more reps than he's had the last couple of years. He's been in the 300, 400 snap range each of the last couple of years total. So that's something to watch out for. But really, that's really a factor of Michigan's depth on their defensive line, not what Maurice Hurst is capable of. But when he's on, and there's so few guys in college football that can contain him because he's such an explosive talent and can line up at a number of positions inside.
Yeah, definitely want to see that full workload from Hurst. Dominant, really. If you just take his last 2 years of part-time play and add them up into one full season, it's the type of dominant production that we see from the better first-round interior defensive linemen. So do love Hurst's game. And you mentioned, with Vea, 6'5", 344, a lot of times you have a 340-pound interior lineman who is going to be pretty good against the run, and they're pretty good athletes. So like a Dontari Poe, you just assume, Dontari Poe, Haloti Ngata, you just assume that they'll be able to rush the passer, which isn't always the case. We've seen with Poe, hasn't always been able to get after the quarterback, and even with Ngata, not always a dominant interior rusher. But I think Vea, I'm not saying he's going to be dominant getting after the quarterback, but he's at least producing on that end, and the way he can push the pocket absolutely outstanding. So I don't think he's a one-dimensional player, which does put him in that first round and in top half of the first round type of conversation, because he's not just a big 340-pound run plugger.
I'll just say I love the Maurice Hurst comp to Gerald McCoy. I think stylistically that is spot on. Just the way they play, winning, firing right off the line of scrimmage and, trying just move the line of scrimmage no matter what. I think that. Are
you describing Dominique Easley, though? Because I used Gerald McCoy. I said with Easley, he was the quickest off the ball since Gerald McCoy, but Easley did also struggle with finishing plays, both against the run and as a pass rusher. Similar size with Hurst and Easley, maybe? Dominique Easley comp. And
I like that comp too. I like them all. I'm a fan.
He's got like 12 knee surgeries under his belt now. Poor Dominique.
You know what's fun with that too? Looking at Hurst's spider chart, basically he's at the top of every single category except two: tackling efficiency and sack conversion rate, which basically says he struggles to finish. He does everything else extremely, extremely well at an elite level, but he's got to finish consistently.
Absolutely.
All right, we've hit 9 guys now, so let's get to our top 10. Who's gonna round it out for you, Steve?
We had a little debate. 2 wide receivers. I'll let Josh bring it into the table. I'm going to bring Cortland Sutton, the wide receiver out of SMU, to the table. 6'3", well over 200 pounds, a contested catch, down the field type of guy. I want to see a little bit more consistency on the underneath stuff, but I think Sutton, when you're talking about the top wide receivers in the class, Sutton is right up there, and it's all about style and what you need. Mike Williams went in the top 10 last year as a guy that you trust in those contested situations. I think Sutton is maybe a little bit better, even maybe not as smooth of a route runner, but I think he brings a lot to the table and will at least be in that top half of the first round discussion.
Yeah, I like Sutton a lot too. I just don't think he's quite the dynamic athlete that my wide receiver is, and that's Calvin Ridley. Now, obviously, maybe not obviously to the viewers, but uniquely with him is he's older, even though he's a true junior. I think he's already 22. So that's certainly something that NFL teams wish that he was a 21-year-old coming out. That's just not going to be the case with him. So you're going to get a couple, presumably less years out of him, and maybe that's what in the minds of some, like Steve, will knock them out of the top 10. But I just see a complete dynamic playmaker that is a better athlete than Sutton, that can just do it all, not just the contested catches, but he can run routes, he can take the screen and make guys miss and take it to the house, he can block as well. There's not one thing on the football field that I'm not convinced Calvin Ridley can do at an elite level at the NFL level.
It's because he's 30. It's not fair. He's a man amongst boys. Look, Ridley's good too, and production certainly hurt by inconsistent quarterback play the last 2 years. Yeah. Jake Coker, Jalen Hurts. So you have to watch his total game. I see the deep threat there. You see the after the catch threat. Age-wise, it's not so much. The age thing is more you're seeing a guy that's just more mature than some of the guys that he's going up against. So it's not always apples to apples. But if he could play, he could play, and I still think he's a first-round caliber player. I'd like to see more consistent quarterback play this year at Alabama to kind of highlight his skills, though.
Yeah, the quarterback play thing really. I would hate to be a wide receiver going to Alabama right now just because of how much behind the 8 ball you are. You're a run blocker at this point. You're a glorified tight end if you're going to Alabama.
People wanted to make Julio Jones a Heisman candidate because they said he was such a good run blocker. Because he couldn't get any targets. Obviously, he was still a stud. So it doesn't hold everybody back, Mike.
That's why Laquan Treadwell made it in the first round too. So sometimes it helps. All right, we're going to get into some quarterback talk here, but first I want to talk to you guys about our newest sponsor, one we're really happy to have here. It's called Tavor, a beer delivery service, craft beer. You go download the app right now on the App Store. Twice a day, you'll get notified about new beers available in the store. Select any beers that you want, beers that you cannot find in your area. They work with over 400 breweries around the world. This is not a subscription. This is not a beer of the month club. Only pick the beers you want. Only pick the beers that you're interested in. And you can choose the delivery date. If you're throwing a party, you can choose to have it, set to deliver to you the day before that party is going to happen. You can have one beer. You can get 300 beers. No matter what you order, it's
300 beers, Mike?
One flat fee, 300 beers. Sounds like a typical weekend for me and Steve, but that's Tavor. Go download it in your app store. I truthfully can't wait to use it. I'm excited.
I just get excited every day seeing the new selection, what they're proposing, because it's such a great variety. I love it. I know our beer connoisseur Brian Hall, who's rated over 2,000 beers.
Yeah, why is he?
He loves it as well. So big fan and do highly suggest it.
Not to be the old man of the group, guys, but how about the fact that no one's out driving to go get beer? I think that's awesome.
Oh yeah, that
is great.
That has a lot of meaning to me in terms of I would love that aspect of it. So yeah, right to your front door, Tavor, go download it today. All right, let's go talk about some quarterbacks. We mentioned one in our top 10 list, Sam Darnold, but we also mentioned there are an absolute handful of guys who could work their way into the first round conversation. And with everyone in the NFL seemingly needing a quarterback these days, everyone's searching for that franchise guy. What are the names on your list right now of guys you think could end up getting selected next April in the first round?
Josh, you could take it away with a couple names, but there's a lot of potential here. The NFL is going to be looking at.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do, Steve. I'm going to take two guys that I think are more my guys, and then you give us two that you think are more on your end, okay?
Fair. Let's do it.
I'm going to start with Washington State's Luke Falk, and that's probably not the place people were expecting me to start at. They think, oh, Washington State, he's a system guy. Those guys don't make it. Well, that's fair to an extent, but man, when I watch Luke Falk on film, there's so much he does mentally, pre-snap, post-snap. I think he does a great job of manipulating defenders, going through his progressions, and throwing the ball, quite frankly, where defenders aren't going to be. He understands how to not just throw an accurate ball and on all different route types, but also when he has a defender crossing, maybe it's a safety closing, how to protect his wide receiver. I think that's something he really excels at and needs to be given more credit for. Doesn't have a huge arm, but I think some of that might be mechanics, lower body mechanics that can actually be fixed. I think sometimes he just needs to stride into throws and put a little more zip on them. So we'll see if that fixes itself a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly he adjusts to having some new targets this year. As guys like Gabe Marks are no longer there. They're in the NFL now. So we'll see how he continues his development this year. The other guy that I'm really intrigued by is Josh Rosen in UCLA, so staying out in the Pac-12. Rosen obviously didn't have a great year last year. He missed quite a bit of it due to injury. One of those situations where he didn't have a lot of help around him. I thought his receivers let him down, both in terms of route running and dropping the ball. His offensive line was atrocious at times. You could see his ability to mentally process things, but I think there are also times where, while he shows you all the physical and mental tools, he would also at times just throw the ball where it shouldn't be, and he had just a couple of those that just make you want to pull your hair out. So I want to see him have a little more consistency there. Hopefully he has better production from everyone around him, and that can help him round out his game a little bit better. But I think in terms of pure, here's a term I know you guys love, pure upside, pure physical potential, I think he has
cut that out.
I know.
Josh is
That's
cut
why
from the entire podcast.
Cut his mic
out.
But no, in all seriousness, no, I don't think there's anybody that has the physical capacity to do on the football field in terms of being a quarterback what he has. And that certainly includes Sam Darnold. So if he can put all the pieces together on and off the field, I think he has a chance to be that top 10 pick.
Yeah, if I could touch on Falk for a second, I do love his feel for the game. The idea of the phrase touch thrower comes to mind when I'm watching Falk, and I don't know if that's because he either throws with great touch or if it is that lack of arm strength. I think the arm strength thing is a bit of a concern. I do like his feel for leading guys through zones. He does run that Washington State system extremely well, has a ton of experience with it. Arm strength is never the first thing you should talk about with a guy, I don't think. Or if it is, it's a little bit concerning, and we'll talk about a guy who that is the first thing we'll talk about in a minute, and we'll explain why it's a concern. But with Falk, it's not, you have to worry about it being a detriment. Does he have enough arm? He probably does, but, it's when you have to work off platform and he has to make plays outside of structure. I have a bit of a concern there with Falk. I think with Rosen, I think the talent is as evident as it gets. I was at Elite 11 when he was there, and you could see the talent on the field, but you also saw, behind the scenes, the people cringing when, he was the way he handled certain things. I think some of those off-field questions for Rosen are still valid, and they show up on the field because while you see the talented player, you also see a player who in his very first start as a true freshman looked like a future number 1 pick and has rarely gotten back to those heights of his first ever game where he was dominating against Virginia. Every type of throw in the book looked unbelievable. And then you have a game against BYU or UNLV where he just doesn't live up to his potential. So I want to see Rosen put it all together on the field before, really saying, okay, this is a first-round player that NFL teams can trust. So those, both absolutely very much in the mix, but I think also those question marks that need to be answered. And I see that heavy influence that Jordan has on you with these Pac-12 guys. Let me talk Oklahoma quarterbacks, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Controversy here as well. Mason Rudolph, we'll start with him, Oklahoma State quarterback. Good size, should be a guy that has a big arm, but doesn't really always show it. He's very inconsistent with his zip. I think my favorite thing about him is how he can throw the ball outside the numbers as far as his timing and ball location. The deep out, the deep comeback, which is often used as like the holy grail throw for quarterbacks, which is probably a little overrated, but the way he throws it with timing and accuracy is just outstanding, has a great feel for it, has good deep ball production, doesn't always throw a clean deep ball. They try to put a ton of air under it at Oklahoma State, makes for some ugly looking passes. But I think there's a lot to like about Rudolph's game, consistent production the last couple of years. I worry a little bit. There's some, I love Mike. Let's start the 9-inch hand rumors. They're already out there for Mason Rudolph.
Are they?
And they're already out there.
Won't Zach? Couldn't Zach verify this?
Zach had 9-inch hands. He seems to think Mason. We
high-fived him and saw that his fingertips lined up.
We need to get some photographic evidence of Mason's hands compared to Zach's because rumors about small hands, and it kind of shows up in his game a little bit because Zach, my partner on the Big Time Throwcast, has said it's not so much the cold weather games. It's a lot of just short passes, catch and throw type of plays, and you see that a lot with Rudolph's game. Catch, get rid of the ball, and his accuracy kind of wanes a little bit. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. And then again, arm strength wise, he has some passes where he shows good zip, and then other times it just does not come out as cleanly. So something to keep an eye on with Rudolph. And then Baker Mayfield, a guy that I don't think anybody has as a projected first-round pick, and I don't know that he's necessarily going to go in the first round. I just know from an on-field production standpoint, it's tough to find on-field weaknesses to his game beyond stature, beyond some off-field concerns. But as far as on the field, I think he has enough arm despite being a little bit smaller. I think he's got great feel for making plays within and outside of structure, throwing on the run, doesn't miss a ton of throws. He's been had the lowest percentage of negatively graded throws in the nation the last couple of years. And in charted accuracy, as far as tight window throws goes, he can make them. He can make tight window throws, even if he doesn't have as many to make as other quarterbacks. So I think Baker Mayfield, even if he doesn't end up in the first round, just feels like that guy that I want on my team, and he'll get a shot to start an NFL game and will probably be productive against all odds.
Yeah, a couple quick thoughts on those guys, Steve. I'll start with Mayfield. And yes, when the play breaks down, he does an excellent job of scrambling and he can deliver the ball downfield, but I don't feel like he's ever actually beating coverage. I don't see him making tight window throws like we see with Sam Darnold, like we see with Luke Falk, two other guys that, as we've already pointed out, they aren't necessarily huge arm guys, but they just have that knack for being able to put that ball in tight areas. And I just don't know that I consistently see that from Baker Mayfield. I think he benefited a lot from the talent that was around him. So that's what's going to make this year interesting for him, because he doesn't have either of those running backs anymore. They're both in the NFL. doesn't have his top receiver from last year. He's also in the NFL. So he's going to have to make a lot of those plays by himself to an extent. And obviously they're going to get tested right away. I think week 2 is against Ohio State. So really looking forward to that game and really looking forward to see how he kind of takes complete control of that team, or we'll see if maybe it really is the Oklahoma system and he is able to dish out to new guys, or whether it's, his doing. Talking about Mason Rudolph, I mentioned earlier, accuracy to me is paramount, and you talked about how there's some inconsistencies with him. It might be due to hand size, and that's really what terrifies me with him. You'll see him make every throw. If you see a quarterback that can make that deep out, that cross hash out, you will probably be able to go on Twitter and see Steve Palazzolo just ranting and raving about him, because that is his absolute favorite thing in the world to see. And Rudolph can certainly do that, like you highlighted. But, man, there's just too many times where he's not under pressure and he's just not getting the ball there for some reason. The accuracy's not there. So whether it's hand size, whether it's just he's just not an accurate quarterback, I have some real concerns with him in that capacity as well.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and with Rudolph, too, going from first read to second read, his accuracy waned a little bit, too. So definitely some issues there. That's just 5 names that we've mentioned. I know as far as first-round hype goes and, first-round type of potential, you have to mention Heisman winner Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. Yeah. And then Josh Allen out of Wyoming. And Josh Allen's funny because he's the guy that you mentioned his arm first. That's the first thing you mention about him. And I feel like I'm cheating on him because I feel like I kind of helped build up some of the hype. And October was like, man, you got to see this guy from Wyoming. He's throwing the ball 50 yards on the run to his left. Looks like Aaron Rodgers on some of these throws. But when you go – and so there's a lot to like from a tool standpoint. But as far as just basic quarterback things like 3-step drop, finding the open man, doesn't like doing it, hates throwing short stuff in rhythm. He likes to make plays outside of the pocket. So as far as, that natural playmaking ability and big arm and throwing on the run, he has a lot of the wow plays. But with Allen, I want to see some of the simple plays. And I think that's what might, he'll probably go in the first round just because the size, velocity, athleticism, the velocity is absolutely absurd. He throws some passes that are just by the receiver before he comes out of his break. And I don't think his timing's off. I just think he throws the ball that fast. It is ridiculous sometimes the way Josh Allen throws the ball, but that's not completing passes. So I think he'll go in the first round, but I think that I don't know that he should until he, improves some of the, doing some of the basics. And then as far as Lamar Jackson, I think he has a good arm, can make some tight window throws, has shown it. It's just that consistent throw for throw accuracy is not there just yet. I think he's got a decent feel for the game. It's just, to me, its accuracy is not there. You'll see some special throws from Lamar, but too many easy misses as well.
See, I worry if Lamar really has that feel. That's not something I felt that I saw on film. I saw a lot of one reads and then taking off, and certainly maybe that's a product of the offense and them just understanding he's so dynamic with his feet that they have to use that as a weapon, and it makes sense. And obviously he won a Heisman Trophy based off that. But you really don't see him working through progressions, getting to secondary, tertiary targets. That's really a concern for me. I thought there were a lot of times where he appeared to be throwing to his man instead of throwing to the spot where his man was going to be, and that lent itself to him throwing balls behind his targets and bringing defensive backs back into it when his man was initially open. So he's got a lot to work with there. And going back to Josh Allen, boy, he was really frustrating for me to watch because I didn't get to see much of him during the year. So my first look at him was just off the film of really sitting down to evaluate. So I didn't get that whole kind of buzzy period that you get with a big arm quarterback the first time you see him, and you're not really evaluating all the other stuff that goes on. And I'm with you on what you saw in terms of just not being willing to, take the easy play, always has to win the game on every single throw. That's something he needs to learn not to do. Obviously, Wyoming was very successful last year. You look at the win-loss columns. They won a lot of football games, and they're probably going to do so this year. But I just think mentally he has a long, long way to go in his development for me to, even with his arm strength, to say that he's worthy of being a first-round pick.
All right, at least one more quarterback to mention. Let's talk Mike White from Western Kentucky, a guy
There's the man.
Yeah, there's a guy that's going to be – that's the name to know going into the season that will be a more familiar name next spring.
Oh, I love Mike White. He was a very exciting player to watch. When Jordan and I went through quarterbacks, we wanted to get a small school kid because there are a bunch of them from a variety of places this year. We want to say there's got to be one small school prospect that is going to look decent and maybe not be a super elite player, but looks at least like a day two prospect. And I really think Mike White right now, before he even steps on the field for his redshirt senior season at Western Kentucky, is a viable day two pick. He didn't always show a big arm, but I think part of that is because when you watch him, while he has good lower body mechanics, he doesn't really use his legs very well other than to turn his hips and get a little bit of torque. He doesn't really stride into his throws and generate power with his legs. So I think that's something he can fix with that, and he can improve his arm strength. He throws to every single part of the field with accuracy and timing. Led the nation in deep pass adjusted completion percentage at 60.5%. That's nothing to to dismiss. That's a pretty phenomenal thing that he was very capable of. And they threw a lot of those deep passes at Western Kentucky. Certainly, it's a function of that offense. They love to work the ball downfield. Maybe that'll change a little bit this year now that Braum is over in Purdue. So that's something to keep an eye on. But he really excels at it as well. Just a tremendous deep ball thrower. And when you have a guy that has his sense of timing, his mechanics, upper and lower body, just a feel for the offense, even though it's that spread system, I think the sky's the limit for this kid. I really, really like Mike White.
So if I'm hearing you guys correctly, that is 7 to 8 quarterbacks with first-round potential going into next year's draft. How many do you think actually do end up going? We saw 3 go this past year. How many go next year?
I think you could see 5 that actually go. I think there is a realistic possibility that Sam Darnold does not come out. I would say that he probably does, but he's going to be a redshirt sophomore. Andrew Luck did not come out as a redshirt sophomore. He waited till his redshirt junior year. There's a possibility Darnold goes back to school. I don't know if the NFL is as high on Luke Falk, but I could see them liking him enough there. Lamar Jackson, I think. I compare Lamar Jackson to Michael Vick as far as a guy that has the arm to make some special throws, inconsistent, just keeping it basic. Big arm, inconsistent accuracy, and special athleticism that will play at the NFL level. I don't think he's going to be out-athleted at the next level. So I think somebody will try to build an offense around Lamar Jackson. I don't think people look at Baker Mayfield as a first-round pick. I'm just telling you the production is off the charts and tough to ignore. And then I do think people expect Josh Rosen to be a first-round pick. Mason Rudolph has a chance in the first round. I think Josh Allen will be a first-round pick. And Mike White's that guy that easily could get up into that mix because he's got the size and the look and on-field production to back it up.
Part of that, too, if we're talking at the back end of the first round, you have a small school kid. If a team's picking back there, they might not need him to play right away because they're generally one of the better teams in the league unless there's trades involved. Right. And you've got that fifth year in the contract worked into it, which teams love to take advantage of that with quarterbacks taken late in the first round too. So he has that working in his favor as well. I think 5, especially if Darnold comes out, is likely. Otherwise, I would probably say 4.
You also have to look at there's going to be a crazy quarterback carousel next year. From Alex Smith is going to find a new team but not be the long-term answer. And Ryan Tannehill, Miami's going to have some questions about him. And then you have teams like the Steelers, the Chargers, the Giants, that class of 2004, Roethlisberger, Rivers, Eli Manning. When do they go and get their future quarterback? So I think there's a lot there. Carson Palmer in Arizona.
Jaguars and Blake Bortles.
Jaguars and Blake Bortles are at a crossroads here. So there's a lot to look at as far as quarterbacks next year. I think it's going to be, these guys, the week to week, development of each of these guys is going to be just a massive storyline this entire college football season.
I love it. I love drafting a quarterback in the first round. I love it. 5 quarterbacks going in the first round.
32
quarterbacks going in the first round next year. The value, we talked about it last week, or was it last week? The value of a quarterback, how much it outweighs every other position and how important that is. I would get on board with 5 in the first round. If there really are that many talented ones, I can get on board with that. So
mailbag number 2 episode, I think we answered that question.
That's what it was. All right. So let's keep it moving. Let's go on to some sleepers. Everyone can identify those top, elite talents, the top 10 prospects we talked about earlier. Everyone can put on the tape and realize those are good. Who are the guys that maybe people haven't gotten around to seeing, people haven't gotten around to noticing that they're special talents, but we here at PFF, the grades show something, the tape shows something, we've seen something that says, hey, this guy has NFL level potential. Who would you guys say are some sleepers in next year's class?
Josh, give me some names.
Well, I want to start in the Dakotas because we have 2 guys out there in those 2 states that normally, you wouldn't think of big-time NFL prospects out there, but South Dakota's Dallas Goedert, tight end, that really is their entire offense. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's a personal favorite, which is an understatement of Jordan Blockers. Really, he should have a restraining order against him at this point because it's really a little creepy, to be honest. But there's not a thing he can't do in terms of being a tight end. He's a very willing blocker. He's huge. He's about 6'6", 270-ish. Just obviously it's a lower level, so that's certainly an issue, and can't wait to see him at Senior Bowl playing against the big boys because I have no doubts in my mind that that's where Goddard's going to end up this year. But just a huge guy that can stretch the seams. Linebackers can't cover him. Safeties are just not big enough to be able to handle him. Excellent at the catch point. He can high point. He can run tight routes. He can run reverses there. He does everything in that offense, and he's a lot of fun to watch. And the other guy that I just got to watch recently is North Dakota cornerback Deion Harris. He's about 6'3", well over 200, just a huge guy. Interested to see how he tests athletically. I think he's going to do well enough, but you see him use that side in terms of his physicality. He has some ball skills. Really what you're looking for in that cover 3 corner that can close the gap effectively, that can run downfield and use his size to his advantage. I think he's kind of that modern day oversized corner that NFL teams love, and I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be rising as the year progresses.
Yeah, and I'll give you actually a couple other cornerback names to keep an eye on. Quentin Meeks from Stanford, a guy that had his season cut short last year. Another guy, the NFL is always looking for 6-foot-plus corners, right? So it's got to be, you have to have that level of size. He's over 6'1", and I actually think he's a little bit more comfortable playing off coverage, has a little bit of work to do in press coverage, but certainly has that skill set to be a press corner. Reminds me a little bit of Rasul Douglas from West Virginia, who was a little bit more, had the length, had the size, a little bit more comfortable in off than press, but certainly a guy that press coverage teams are going to be taking a look at. And then Isaiah Oliver from Colorado, that loaded Colorado secondary last year. They had Chidobe Awuzie go in the second round. Akello Witherspoon goes in the third round. 2 cornerbacks, and then Oliver's that number 3 corner who, when he was targeted, continued to make plays. He has good size, good straight line speed. He'll get stuck a little bit on the top of routes as far as his lateral agility goes, but I think he has just good. He could play press, good off coverage skills. I mean, he could do it all as well. So Oliver's going to get tested a lot more. Meeks is going to get tested a lot more, and I think those are a couple names just to keep an eye on, guys that we'll know a little bit more, I think, come around draft time.
Steve, I got a couple of other interior guys to look at, one on each side of the ball. First, let's start with UTEP guard Will Hernandez, just an absolutely dominant player in every single facet. He didn't give up a sack or a hit this year, just gave up 1 pressure in almost 400 pass rush and passing snaps. So that's just phenomenal production. in the passing game, and as a run blocker, just a physically dominant force, just absolutely destroys guys at the point of attack. Very first play I watched him, and hopefully this isn't a little bit of bias because of it, but very first play, he pancakes this guy and then just belly flops on top of him. So that tells you a little bit about his mentality. To me, he's the best small school interior prospect really since Mike Iupati came out of Idaho. I think he's that good, and he's certainly graded well for us. Another guy that I think is falling under the radar a little bit at this point, and probably because he can limbo under it because he's only about 6 foot, even though he's a defensive tackle, that's Minnesota's Steven Richardson. He's a guy that just exploded at the beginning of the year last year, just grading off the charts. He has that first step quickness. He has a variety of moves, really skilled pass rusher. Just has to prove that he can, on a consistent basis, hold up at the line of scrimmage, considering his size. That's certainly going to be the NFL's biggest concern. But we've seen so many instances the last few years of undersized interior defensive linemen that can play and excel at the NFL level. I wouldn't be surprised to see Steve Richardson eventually get a little bit of a bump up because of the precedent that's been set before him.
Mike loves those guys. Take all those undersized disruptors, right, Mike?
Yes, sir. It's hard to block. Ask any offensive lineman. It is difficult to block a 6 foot defensive tackle. You have no place to put your hands.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and case in point, my second favorite guard, O'Connell from Washington State, just a huge guy. He's 6'8", 360. How's he going to get down to that level? I mean, I love O'Connell, but how's he going to get to a guy that's barely 6 foot? He's not, and he's going to consistently have that leverage, and as long as he has the strength, I mean, he's just a bear to be able to handle for interior linemen.
Exactly. I'm 100% on board. I have not watched a snap of him, but I am on board.
You heard interior, undersized interior disruptor, and you're on board. I'll give you a couple other smaller school type guys to watch out for. Marcus Davenport, edge rusher out of UTSA. That's Texas San Antonio. They do have some fun playmakers on defense this year. Davenport, 6'6", about 250 off the edge. He has some skills. I want to see how he develops. A guy that caught my eye out of SMU, cornerback Jordan Wyatt. I mean, the guy has, he went up against Baylor, who has just all fast receivers. He was holding his own there. His pure speed looks really, really good. Very productive last year. So Jordan Wyatt, cornerback out of SMU, another guy to keep an eye on. And as far as the guys that had, productive small sample sizes that are going to have more opportunities this year, Bryce Love, running back out of Stanford. Again, Jordan's guy that he loves. He's replacing Christian McCaffrey. He might look like Christian McCaffrey as far as production goes at the end of the season. Rashaan Evans, a linebacker out of Alabama, has been productive every time he's been given the opportunity, whether off the edge or as a traditional linebacker. So keep an eye on a full slate or a full season from him this year. And then one guy I really like too, I don't think he's going to be involved in the 2018 draft, but he's a redshirt sophomore, Tim Settle, interior defensive lineman out of Virginia Tech. Big guy that moves pretty well, productive as a redshirt freshman. He might be a 2 years down the road type of guy. He is technically draft eligible, and I do expect a big breakout year out of him. So one of my favorite things, guys, is to find these guys that only had 200, 300 snaps, really good productivity, and kind of projecting them forward to a full season and seeing if they can keep that consistency.
Yeah, I like that you brought Settle into it. That was a guy I got a chance to look at a couple weeks ago. Definitely liked him. Virginia Tech has a bunch of guys on that defense, and one of my favorite guys is linebacker Tremaine Edmonds. Generally played a lot of inside backer, but I think he's a very capable edge rusher. He's 6'4", about 240. He's got really long arms. He has explosiveness rushing off the edge. Virginia Tech has a habit of putting guys on the defensive front seven the last couple of years that they're kind of out of position where they play him. And while I think Edmonds is certainly capable of playing inside linebacker, I love him as an edge prospect. I'm interested to see how they use him this year if he gets more time to rush off the edge, because I think that's where he really excels. One last guy I want to talk about, heading back to Big Ten area, and a team that's not known in recent years for producing big-time NFL prospects, but Rutgers, you heard that right, Rutgers, guys. They have an offensive tackle, Tariq Cole, graded off the charts for us. And when you watch him on film, he has the athleticism, the physicality to back it up. I love his ability to shuffle out and cut off the edge, can redirect against counter moves. I really like what he does as a pass protector. And as long as he can continue to develop that, translate that better into the run game as well, I think he has the makings of being a top 50, top 100 pick as well.
There you have it. There are your handful of sleepers. But you guys know I love to hate on these college kids. I need one name from each of you that's overrated. I won't make you do a bunch, but I need one name of someone in college right now you think it's overrated. I know that we haven't really gotten to draft season where people have set in stone opinions on guys, but just give me one guy who you think right now is a little overhyped by the national media.
I'm going to go with Lowell Lotulelei from Utah. Obviously, his brother Star exactly. His brother was a high draft pick for Carolina, and quite frankly, Star hasn't really lived up to his billing at the NFL level. I think that can certainly be argued, but what a disappointment to watch Lowell on film at times. You see the physicality, the strength, his ability to control the line of scrimmage, control blockers, but he has almost no skill set in terms of being a pass rusher. He's not a very active guy, and I just don't think he has a high motor. He's not a consistent player on a snap-to-snap basis, in particular on passing down. So when I think it comes down to it, if he fails to produce again this year in terms of being a pass rusher, the NFL is going to pass over him to a certain extent, because the NFL knows you better be able to rush the passer if you're a front seven player. And if he can't do that, I just have trouble seeing him land in the first round like so many are automatically projecting him based off his name.
Yeah, see, that's the example I was using before. You get this big guy, you look at him and say, oh, he moves pretty well. He'll be able to be a 3-down player. But if he's not rushing the passer well right now, I don't know what shows he's going to do it at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, Azim Victor, the linebacker out of Washington, I've seen him getting, and I don't keep up too much as far as hype goes and everything, but I've at glances seen him first, second round type of hype. Just haven't seen the consistency on the field. I don't think he's a bad player. Picks up a lot of his solid PFF grade as a pass rusher. Just want to see more consistency from him in coverage and as a tackler. 24 missed tackles over the last 2 seasons. Only 456 snaps last season due to injury and having his season cut short. But Victor's a guy I think is a little bit more of a projection at this point. I don't think he's a bad player by any means. The other name that comes to mind, similar, Deshaun Hand out of Alabama. Not a bad player, former 5-star recruit, been pretty solid when he's been on the field. Hasn't played like a first-round pick, and I think maybe because of that 5-star pedigree, getting a little bit overhyped. And DUI aside that he just picked up, could be the year that he breaks out if he's given 500 or 600 snaps this season.
Guys, I have to say I really like the way I love the way this podcast set up. Being the drafts guy with Jordan, because we built his guys up, we built up so many Pac-12 guys, and then we just smashed him with just banging on 2 Pac-12 guys. So
tear him down.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, bring him back down to our level. I like that.
There you have it. That is our little draft preview. The guys to watch, what to watch for this upcoming college football season. Make sure to check out Josh on the new Drafts podcast. He does it with Jordan weekly. Follow him on Twitter as well, at PFF_Josh. Follow Steve at PFF_Steve, and follow myself at PFF_Mike. And make sure to go check out the PFF Draft Guide. It comes for free with the PFF Edge subscription. It will be updating year-round. Steve, when was the latest update of the Draft Guide?
Yeah, we just did this week.
This
week
week
of August 7th, we just finished version 2. Over 300 player profiles, 316 to be exact. And you can find the PFF unique signature stats on over 2,200 players. 2,200 players have at least one stat about them in the draft guide. So it's all in there. And if you sign up now for this preseason draft guide and PFF Edge, you'll get all the postseason versions as they come out. So just get it right now and get ahead of the game.
The only year-round draft guide. Make sure you guys go and check it out. And we'll be back later this week. You guys have a good one.